Okay, so this is the lesson for section 3.4. As I've mentioned in class, this is basically the combination of all the things that we've done so far in this chapter. We're going to talk about order of operations, and we're going to talk about all the rules of the of integers. So the first thing I want to do is kind of address the thing that we touched on in the last class. I gave you a preview of two of the problems where we had those exponents. I snuck those in. So just as a reminder, when we see 5 squared, this means 5 multiplied by 5. So obviously that's 25. And we got to be careful that we don't say that that's 10, because 5 times 2 is what's actually 10. We have to make sure that when we talk about exponents, it's multiplying by itself, and then when it's multiplication, it's multiplied together. So when we also look at exponents, we have to remember that it's always the base. So if you look here, we have 3 and 3, so that's the base, and it's multiplied twice. If I have here 5 times 5 times 5, that means 5 is the base, written over and over again, and it's written over 3 times. We can't combine them. It's not going to be 15 to the 6th or 15 to the 2 or anything like that. We basically write individually. This is representing all the 3's, and this is representing all the 5's. So this here is basically exactly what we had before, which is the exponential expression. Again, the exponent is 3 and the base is 4. That tells us that I have to write the base 3 times. The base that is 4, I have to write it 3 times. And we did this before, where 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 is 64. So this is the answer here. And remember that when we see this, it can be a quick knee-jerk to say, oh, well, that's going to be 64. Or, excuse me, that's going to be 12. But it's not. Make sure we're not multiplying these together. We're writing it out 4 times 4 times 4. And I strongly recommend that you do that. So let's look at this idea here, carrying over to the stuff I gave you a preview of last class. So when we're looking at this, again, the base is 7, the exponent is 2, and what that means is that I'm multiplying 7 times 7, which the answer is 49. That's easy. That's what we did the first day of class. But now I want to point out the difference between this one and this one, B and C. So in this one, in choice B, the base is only 7. The negative is the second step. And this is a lot like what we did when we did the absolute values. Remember, we put that negative on the outside and we carried it down, because the 2 is technically only touching the 7. So the base is 7, the exponent is 2, so that means I'm doing 7 times 7. Actually, I'll write it up here. I'm doing 7 times 7, which is 49. And then, last but not least, that negative comes down last. So it's kind of hanging out here waiting, and it comes in later. The base is 7, the negative is the second step. But in this case, in part C, the negative is in the parentheses. So it's part of the base. Meaning that when I'm looking at this, I'm not multiplying 7 times 7 and the negative comes down later. I'm multiplying negative 7 multiplied by negative 7. And the exponent is still 2, so that means it's negative 7 times negative 7, which is a positive 49. Now make sure you don't say, oh, every time it's a parentheses it's positive, every time it's not, it's negative. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes we try to look for shortcuts, and they don't always apply. So let's look at other situations here. And I'm going to get this so it goes on the same page. So let me get that. So looking at a couple other ones. Now this again, I don't have any negatives to deal with, so the base is 2. That's the number that's going to be written out over and over and over again. And I wrote it out 3 times because the exponent is 3. And again, make sure that you don't say, oh, well, the answer is 6. That's a knee-jerk reaction. I have to make sure I go 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 more is, the answer is actually 8. Oops. Okay. But let's look at this one. This negative is inside. That means my base is negative. If it's inside the parentheses, then that negative gets written over and over and over again. So, and I'm going to, and again, I wrote it 4 times because that exponent was 4. So going from side to side, negative times negative is positive, and I've got 2 negative 2's still hanging out. Then I do it again. Negative times positive is a negative 8. And then I've got negative 8 times negative 2 is a negative, oh, excuse me, is a positive 16. Careful. And then, so, oh, it's inside the parentheses. It must always be positive. Not if I've got it 5 times. So I've got the same thing here. I've got the base is negative 2 because, again, the negative is inside the parentheses. If it was outside, it would be put on later. But this is inside, so it's negative 5. I'm going to write it up here for a little bit more space. Excuse me, it's going to be negative 2. Why did I say negative 5? I'm going to write negative 2 out 5 times. Got to make those dots a little bigger so you don't think I'm subtracting them. And then we're going to go again, left to right. That's negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4. I'm going to put in parentheses. There we go. Helps me with my little dot situation. Negative 2 times 4 is a negative 8. And I've got 2 more negative 2's that I haven't dealt with. Then multiplying the next one, negative 8 times negative 2 is a positive 16. And I've got 1 more 2, so that is a negative 32. So I wrote that negative 2 out 5 times, and that answer is negative. Now, what some people happen to notice is, hey, when it's an even exponent outside that parentheses, I get a positive answer. When it's an odd exponent outside those parentheses, I get a negative answer. And that is a legit pattern. And make sure, again, that we're not saying, oh, any odd, because that didn't have a negative base, so that doesn't make any sense. So just keep in mind, when this inside the parentheses, we write that over and over and over again. When it's outside the value, like it is here in part B, then we do the multiplication and we write that on as the last step. So that's the one little new piece of information that we're going to write. And again, just remember our order of operations, as if I haven't said it enough. We got our groupings, we've got our exponents, we've got our multiplication and division from left to right, and then we've got our subtraction and addition, also from left to right. So if you compare this to the first section we did, but way back in the day, you're going to see that, hey, this is actually pretty close to what we did. But now we have to not only remember the order of operations, but we also have to remember the rules of exponents. So we're going to go through the thing. Again, with my gems. In this one, I can look inside the grouping, that there's nothing to do inside, so that there is no groupings. Really, there are no exponents. So I'm going to do this multiplication here. So this is 6. And then I have 5 minus 6. 5 minus, and then the rest left over. Now I have to remember the rules of integers, or negatives. So 5 minus 6. So some of you can see that on the number line. I go the opposite way. You know me, I always like to add the opposite. So I'm going to go adding the opposite. So if you see that 5 minus 6 is a negative 1, that'd be great. Otherwise, I have to say, well, adding the opposite, I've got opposite signs. So I'm going to see which wins. Well, the negative is heavier, stronger. We talked about that. By 1. Okay, so let's do the next one. Looking again at the gems, I'm going to do what's inside the grouping first. Now 2 minus 5, again, we're going to do adding the opposite. That's a negative 3. And then I'm going to write everything that is left. Now pause for a minute and think about what you would do next. Because we did the groupings. We don't have any exponents. But I know a lot of people want to grab that addition, and you have to resist it. That goes back to the thing we did on the very first class. we have to remember that we don't do what looks right. We do what we know is right by what we know is right. There we go. By doing our order of operations or our directions. So I'm going to be multiplying this. Opposite signs have a negative answer when I multiply. And now I've got the addition to do, and this is simply same sign, we add, and we keep the sign. Again, going negative and going even more negative down the line. Okay. Next one, again, doing the order of operations. This is going to be 18 because I'm going to do my groupings first. So what would I do? There are no more groupings, there are no exponents, so I'm going to do my multiplication and division from left to right. So as I'm scanning, I've got a division here and a multiplication here. This is the first one I see, so I'm going to do this one first, which gives me 9. So scrolling on to the next page, now I'm going to kind of do some spot checking on some of them. So we're going to first start with the one with exponents, because we always kind of seem to glaze over the ones without exponents. So let's do minus of our rules. So I'm going to do some gems. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is this thing here. Inside the groupings, there's nothing to do. So I'm looking at number 5. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the inside, or I'm going to do this exponent first. Now, this is inside. So what this little piece says is negative 2 multiplied by itself 3 times. Negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4, times another negative 2 is a negative 8. Now, I want you to watch very carefully, because this answer, the purple, the exponent, is a negative 8. Now I'm going to bring down everything that was from the problem that I hadn't touched. This 7 came down, this minus came down, and that purple negative is from the exponent. So be careful we don't rush and say, oh, there must be a negative, and you forget one. Because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the add the opposite, and it actually ends up to be 15. So now I'm going to do the same thing. Well, it's still negative 2 to the third. I'm looking at number 6. Same process, same idea. Negative 2 to the third, following this exact same thing that we just did here, is a negative 8. And then the red is everything that I hadn't dealt with yet. So think about what I would do. I would add the opposite, because now all I've got is subtraction. So what I've got is opposite signs, and this is a negative 3. So all this is practicing all of these problems here. And what I'm going to do the rest of this video is simply walking through each one. What I strongly recommend right now is that you pause the video. Work through some, and then I'm going to walk through each one of these one by one, but I want you to make sure that you know what you're doing first. So don't just watch and see if you can follow it. See if you can't do it first, because that's what we're going to be asked you to do on the test. Okay? So pause the video, try a couple, and then let it run and see if it doesn't follow the same thing. Okay, so assuming that you have paused the video, now I'm going to walk through each one. So following the order of operations here, the first thing we do is there are no groupings or exponents, but I have this division. So 15 divided by 3 is 5, and then I carry down the rest. 6 minus 5 is 1. Next one, I do the division first, so this is negative 5. Negative 10 divided by 2, opposite signs become negative answer. Then I'm going to add the 1. Negative 5 plus 1 is a negative 4. This next one, I'm going to do what's in the groupings first. 4 minus 7, that's the same as 4 plus a negative 7, is negative 3. Then I'm going to carry down everything that I haven't used. So we've done the groupings. There are no exponents. So I'm going to multiply. 3 times a negative 3 is negative 9. Then I carry down what I didn't use yet. This is adding the opposite, so my answer is a -3. Moving on. Grouping is 5, and then I write everything that I haven't used. And if you'll notice, I'm very methodical about the red is what I've done, the purple is what I haven't used yet. The more methodical you are about this, the less chance you have for mistake. So 5 divided by 5 is 1, and then I carry down each the negative and the 1 and the minus. So 1 minus 1 is 0. Doing inside the grouping, 6 times a -6 times, excuse me, -6 plus 2 is a -4. And then I carry down what was left. And I just scrolled my little instructions out, so I'm going to look at them again. We've done the grouping. There are no exponents, so this is the multiplication and division from left to right. Now, I've always kind of shied away from doing the multiplication because it's always been second, but this is the first one I see. Isn't that nice? So I do that, then I've got the division, and again, opposite signs, just like the one when I got the 8, opposite signs give me a negative answer. Doing the groupings inside, adding the opposite, that's a -1. And I'm going to write what I haven't used. Groupings are done, no exponents, so I'm going to multiply. 3 times a -1 is -3. And then I have the 7 and the minus that hasn't been used. So then I add the opposite, and this is 10. Again, this is a reminder, you shouldn't just be watching each one that I do, because like I've said in class, just because you can see what I do doesn't mean you can replicate it. So make sure you pause before you watch my videos, or just watch me do them. So looking again, there are no groupings, but this is an exponent. Remember, this is -4 multiplied by -4, because this exponent is, or excuse me, this negative is inside. So -4 times -4 is a positive 16. And then I'm going to do the rest. Now I sometimes get a question is like, why didn't I carry that one down? Because I used it here. So the only one that gets carried down is that 8 minus that was waiting on the outside. And then we've done exponents. There is no multiplication anymore, because remember there's a subtraction in between here. So 8 minus 16 is a -8. And then again, you could have done adding the opposite to see that. Adding the opposite here, or just saying that -8 and going 5 lower. Either way, you'll land at a -13. Moving on to number 10. 1 squared, well, that's just 1 times 1. There's no magic there. That's just that. I should have done that in the red because that's the new stuff. And then that's just positive, so I don't have to do anything with it. So the plus and the 2. Now I just add. There's no multiplication. There's no division, so I just go -7 plus 1. They're opposite signs, so it's a -6. Plus 2 is a -4. Now here's where we talk about what do we do first. We've got the groupings. There are no groupings, but the exponent. This one is not in the parentheses. So this is all I do. This is just 3 times 3 times 3, and be careful that you don't say 9. 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 more is actually 27. So that's what's going here. So this is 27. And then this negative on the outside was not in the parentheses, so it comes down later. So again, take the time to notice the difference between what's in 6 and what's in 11. When it was in 6, we did, or 6 or 5 for that matter, we wrote negative, negative, negative. This one is not in parentheses. This 3 is not in parentheses, so that negative doesn't get written over and over again. So then we multiply. 6 times -2 is -12. And that -27 is there, that minus from right there, and -2. So then we add the opposite. So if that is negative 15 minus 2 is negative 17. Now this one, in number 12, this exponent, that negative is on the inside. So it's not 3 times 3 with a negative weighting. This thing here, that negative is inside, baby. So this one is negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. So negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9. Times that is a negative 27. So this is a negative 27, and then I have to carry down the 5 times 3 and this minus. Remember that speed is probably going to be your worst enemy. So if you kind of fly through it, it's not a hard concept, but it is just hard to keep all these details straight. And what happens is, when some people start flying through and they make a mistake, they all of a sudden think that they're no good at math. And that's just not true. They're just making mistakes because they're flying so fast. So I did the multiplication next, got 15. Adding the opposite, I get to 42. Let's see if I can't give myself a little bit more space here. Okay, so in number 13, we're going to do the grouping, which is a negative 4. And if you needed to see, again, we add the opposite. These are opposite signs. Negative 8 and then divided by 2. So we've done, I scrolled it off, so I'll give myself another thing. We did the grouping, no exponents. So we go multiplication and division from left to right. And again, when you have same signs, your answer is going to be a positive answer. This runs exactly the same. Negative 3 is going to be the answer there. That's the grouping. And then I've got the rest. But this is a negative and a positive multiplied together. So this is going to give me a negative 12. And this one is going to give me an answer of negative 2. Very similar, almost exactly the same. This is a negative 3. Did the groupings. Then we're going to multiply. So negative 8 and a negative 3 is a positive 24. Divided by the negative 4 is a negative 6. These ones I am going to let you do as an individual practice. Pause the video and then try to do all of them, and I will put the steps in a moment. So here you see the work for all of the answers, and again, if you're not seeing, these are the final answers for each one. The one thing I want to point out, which is the problem that most students have, is with part E. Most people disagree with part E because they forget this part here. And if you'll notice here in this parentheses, we had the gems. We know we're supposed to do inside the grouping, but remember, once you're in the gems, you have to, or in the grouping, you have to do another gems as well. So when I'm inside this part right here, I have to make sure that I do the exponents first. It's not 5 minus 2. A lot of people try to do 5 minus 2, get 3, and then square that. That's not what it says. Inside here, we're inside this grouping, so this is what we're going to do here. There's no grouping here, but I have to do this exponent. So that's why this 2 squared to 4 is what I had to do first. There was no multiplication. Then I subtracted to get the 1. So make sure you do that, and don't forget the order of operations inside the grouping. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to email me, or we'll talk next week when we do the review. Thanks, guys.